And joining us now on the debate in Calgary, Alberta, Peter Tertzakian. He is Chief Energy Economist at ARC Financial Corporation and the author of 1,000 Barrels a Second. In Washington, D.C., Jerry Taylor, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute. And joining us here in studio, Patricia Mohr, Vice President, Economics and Commodity Market Specialist at the Scotiabank Group. John Stephenson, Senior Vice President and Portfolio Manager with First Asset Funds. And Richard Laszlo, Energy Program Manager at Pollution Probe. Good of all of you to join us tonight, both here in the studio and to our friends in Points Beyond. I want to start tonight's broadcast by having our director, Michael Smith, play what today will seem like a very amusing piece of tape, but which I think everybody took at face value a few years ago when they first started running these ads. Here's BP. Roll tape.
What size is your carbon footprint?
The carbon footprint, that I don't know.
Whatever it is, the whole population of the world, make that a very, very big number.
How much carbon I produce? Is that it?
You mean the effect that my living has on the earth in terms of the products I consume?
This is when BP was promoting itself as a company that was interested in things beyond petroleum. And Peter, I want to bring you in for starters. Lots of companies, including BP, obviously have tried to put a more friendly face forward, show them as more environmentally friendly. What does this spill do to all of those efforts?
Well, it certainly shatters that notion, and I think the oil companies are already fighting an uphill battle trying to portray themselves as purveyors of energy of the future, and this certainly won't help.
Jerry, does it shatter it?
I don't think it was really there in the first place. They've spent a lot of money trying to apologize to the public for what they do and apologize for their business. I don't think it's bought them any PR points. I don't think public opinion about oil companies has changed much during this campaign. It's still as hostile and relatively negative as it always has been. So I rather doubt that there's anyone out there saying, gosh, this spill in the Gulf has really, really changed my mind about the oil industry. Most people had a pretty low opinion of it to start with.
Well, John, that's an interesting point. I mean, oil companies were never sort of viewed by the public as being angelic, I suppose, to begin with. So maybe this spill will not have that much of an effect on their PR image because it wasn't that great to begin with? What do you think?
I think that's probably fair. I don't think it was that great. I don't think the investing public certainly buys it because they think the fundamentals are attractive, but at least in the general public, they just see that as big corporate greed, and they look at the outsized profits, or so they call it, when Exxon makes $10 billion and thinks that's enormous. Now, of course, as a percentage of sales, it's in line with the American average, so it's by no means excessive, but certainly that's the perception out there, and I don't think this will change it one bit.
Patricia?
Well, I certainly think that the industry has got some reputational risk now because of this spill. But I guess I'd like to point out that something like 650 deep water wells were actually drilled in the U.S. Gulf in the past 4 years, and with very little incident. So for the most part, I think the operating experience of the industry in the U.S. Gulf has, until this spill, been actually fairly good. So it really is quite a shame that that this has happened.
Of the 650, have they all of the others been without incident?
I think for the most part, yes.
It's a bit too much of a softball question, I suppose, to ask the guy from Pollution Probe what he thinks this has done to the image of oil companies, but go ahead, equal time.
Yeah, sure, it hasn't helped, but I mean, just to your point, I mean, you know, there haven't been that many instances in the Gulf before this, but BP's had its share of problems, other oil companies have had its share of problems. Exxon Valdez, of course, the Prudhoe oil spill in 2006, and the refinery explosion in 2005. So there's certainly lots of examples. There have been thousands of oil spills the last few decades.
Certainly, Peter, BP is taking it on the chin for this, but it seems as if the industry as a whole is getting a black eye from this. Do you think that is justified?
Well, not completely. I mean, I think the industry, you know, already was mentioned, the 650 wells in the U.S., not including all the other wells that have been drilled around the world. So I think it's somewhat unfair. And by the way, this is not only an oil company problem, this is a societal issue. I mean, let's not forget that it is society that is now, as I called it in my book, going to the ends of the earth to find the oil that we need to perpetuate our lifestyles and our standard of living. So it's sort of a black eye not only on the oil companies, but it's kind of a black eye indirectly on society as a whole.
Jerry, would you share that view?
I'm not entirely sure. First, I can embellish the number a little bit. Since 1992, 2,256 wells have been drilled, deep wells in the Gulf of Mexico, and this is the first major incident with any of those wells. They have a pretty good track record. Not perfect, obviously. But what I think people forget is that any industrial activity run by human beings is going to entail some risk. There were backup systems at the Deepwater Horizon facility. They failed. They failed over and over again. Why? We're not entirely sure. But any time we have an industrial activity with human beings involved, you're going to have accidents. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about mining for coal, refining crude oil, transporting natural gas to homes, drilling for oil, transporting oil via tanker, or any other industrial activity, whether we're talking about nuclear power or non-energy issues. We're going to have accidents because human beings are fallible. So this shouldn't be surprising. What's actually surprising to me is that the industry has such a relatively decent record here. I mean, they've managed to avoid a significant problem for a very, very long time, but clearly they underestimated the impact. If you look at BP's permit application for this particular well, it listed as a worst case scenario 162,000 barrels a day of a spill, which is well beyond what the administration is saying is going on right now. And then when they were asked on the permit application what that would mean from an environmental standpoint, they said, yeah, it really wouldn't generally be noticed. So the industry, at least BP in particular, definitely wasn't taking this very seriously, at least judging by its permit application.
Well, to your first point, sure, anything that's got human beings involved has got the risk of going south and having something go wrong. But I wonder, Richard, whether we can take the next step and say, I think the public is surprised that the efforts to clean up this mistake have been so futile so far. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, they're dealing with very challenging technical environments. I mean, they're down, a 1.5 kilometers below the Gulf, the surface of the water, and that's a really challenging marine environment. But to his point about the accidents, absolutely, accidents will happen. Humans will make mistakes. Equipment will fail. But I think the demand for oil, we keep consuming more and more oil, and the cheap supplies are increasingly diminishing. The easily accessible supplies are increasingly gone. And we're, as Peter said, going to the ends of the earth. I mean, we keep on going to riskier environments. The risks keep on increasing. The impacts keep increasing. And until we actually start addressing the demand side, we're just going to keep on hopping from potential or disaster to disaster.
Those of us who live in Canada may not appreciate this because where this thing happened is a long way away from where we're living. So some people online have gotten a pretty clever idea, and they've put together, I guess, an application where you can take the size of the spill and superimpose it on a part of the world that you know a little better. Michael, let's bring this up right now if we can. Here is the spill superimposed over southern Ontario, which is where we are. And look how far this thing goes. East of Peterborough, all the way to Buffalo in the south, past Sarnia in the west, way past Barrie in the north. This thing is enormous. Okay, John, help us out on this. Can you blame people for being even more skeptical of the oil industry when they see how much damage one leak can cause, and they seem, almost 6 weeks later, to be no closer to resolving this thing than they were 6 weeks ago?
Well, you're right. They are no closer to resolving it. I think people are skeptical. But I do believe that we're still going to be dependent on the energy industry in many years to come. And I think the fact of the matter is they've drilled tens of thousands of wells in the Gulf of Mexico. It's actually over 30,000 wells in the last 40 years without a major incident. This was extraordinary. It clearly is the worst environmental disaster in American history and is continuing to go on. It certainly is a black eye for BP and for the oil industry, but I do believe in time the oil industry will recover because we just don't have an alternative right now. And people are not willing to live without energy, cars, cosmetics, rubber, all the plastics, all the things that the energy business provides. And I think that's what people miss.
I hear what you're saying, but Peter, and I want to be careful with this analogy here, with this comparison. You hear government officials in the United States in particular say, on national security, we've got to be perfect 100% of the time. The terrorists only have to get it right once to mess us up. It's all well and good to drill 30,000 wells over 40 years and have no incidents to speak of, but one bad one, and we're really in the soup here. I mean, that's a fair comment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's just, it's the one you remember. It's the other ones, the 29,999 are irrelevant. And it's particularly bad when it's in such a challenging deep water environment where, you know, it's effectively the same as being in outer space, the technological challenges. And, you know, it's interesting when you compare it to outer space. If you take something like the space shuttle, it's got all these triple and quadruple redundancy in its systems. And, you know, it doesn't appear as though there was that level of redundancy subsurface. So I think it's actually more the response, the inadequacy of the response planning is more of an issue than the ability to drill these wells.
Patricia, would you follow up on that? It's more the response as opposed to what originally happened that is particularly galling?
Well, I assume that the public actually is quite disappointed at how difficult it's turning out to be really to stop the well from spewing oil, and quite a challenge, in fact. And it seems to me that this particular reservoir has incredible pressure involved with it, which may be one of the difficult situations. But I'm sure that the National Commission in the United States that is looking into the cause of the accident and hopefully is going to come out with some good recommendations, they'll be looking at ways to perhaps improve the equipment that's used in drilling, really recognize that everyone should be using the absolute best practice in their operating procedures, and they'll be coming out with some recommendations as to what to do in terms of backup systems when things fail.
I gather the backup systems in this case didn't work either, though.
No, that's my impression. Some of it didn't, but I think that people are thinking about, for example, remotely being able to press the button on the big BOP platform that was supposed to seal off the well. So systems like that probably are going to be looked at.
We showed some tape from BP earlier. This one is from Shell. This was an ad that everybody, I think, thought was pretty cute a few years ago when it ran. Let's play that and we'll come back and talk. Roll tape, please.
Sometimes we all need to look at things from a different angle.
Wat? Doe dat nog eens.
I thought of calling it the bendy straw drill. The flexibility means the drill can snake through all of these hidden oil pockets from a single offshore platform. And fewer wells means less disruption and less waste. It just shows you that solutions can be found in the most unlikely places.
Now, Jerry, the oil industry has made enormous technical strides that have allowed it to go and find oil in places that were previously unreachable. Now that BP can't figure out how to stop a huge leak that's happening 1.5 kilometers underwater, does it show, in your view, that this industry has overreached with the technology that it has?
Again, I don't think so. Any technology that we deploy is going to be subject to accident and towards systems breakdown. I mean, right now, to blame the response, I think, is incorrect. I mean, we had a very close analog to this event. The Ishtok-1 platform that was run by Pemex in 1979 had a very similar rupture at the borehead, and it took 10 months to shut that field down. The oil flow was actually larger than what we're seeing in the Deepwater 1 horizon, we think. It was 30,000 barrels a day. Right now we're getting 12 to 19,000 barrels a day according to the government, though there are some academics think those numbers are fairly low. But the fact is, given the incredible pressure when one of these wellheads blow, it's virtually impossible to do anything here until you get some relief wells dug. And BP moved a very quick dispatch on that front, and they're drilling those wells as we speak. That might be the first step to actually slow down the flow. But to say they didn't take the proper steps in response, they should have done what? They're doing everything they possibly can, as far as I can tell. They've called in all the world's best experts. They have the equipment. They have more expertise than the federal government or any one of us. It seems to me that, and they also have more incentive than we do, BP has lost over $30 billion in market cap because of this incident. The estimates of their liability have been, the high estimate I've seen has been $12 billion. That was a UBS estimate. Believe me, they have a greater interest than some congressman from Rhode Island to get this thing shut off because the very survival of their company now is at stake.
Peter, do you have any information about that Pemex, that Mexican company's spill from a decade ago, the Ishtok-1, and whether or not that did in fact create the kind of spillage we're seeing this time?
No, I don't. I didn't follow that one. I'll just say that maybe I'm not sort of accusing BP of lack of response time, but maybe further to your question about that shell or the shell video is
Yes.
that perhaps we can say that the technologies, the sophistication of technologies to be able to respond does not match the sophistication of the technologies to exploit the ends of the earth, as I call it.
I think I said 10 years ago. It's probably closer to 30 years ago that Mexican one happened. Richard, try this one on. Should this company, we're talking about new, very high-end technology that they were using here in order to drill in very deep water in circumstances that, as we can now see, are fairly precarious. Should they not have thought of equally as impressive new advances in safety if they were going to employ these kinds of advances in drilling?
Well, I would have thought so. Certainly, they should have known that, in the case of an accident, that, the fact that they're in their application that they said no one would notice, I don't know where that came from, but that no one would notice a spill of, 100,000 barrels of oil a day in a sensitive, coastal area is, just ridiculous. I mean, it's really hubris if they actually did say that.
Well, they have said that even as bad as it is right now, the ocean can handle this. It will, over time,
Sure.
just suck it all up, as it were.
Sure. Well, tell that to the the fishermen on the coast, or the tourism industry over there, or tell it to the the pelicans that are dead. Not that they can hear you, but this is a sensitive marine environment, and it's probably been spoiled for, if not forever, then for a long, long time. And I think the estimated impacts to the local economies there in the tens of billions of dollars, which that's just going to add to the price BP is going to have to pay for this.
Well, if I could jump.
Go ahead.
Jump in just for a second. The Ishtok 1 incident actually gives us some clues here. That was the biggest accidental spill in world history. And it turned out that 3 years later, after biologists went and looked at those oceanic ecosystems and coastal ecosystems affected by the spill, they could find virtually no evidence that the spill had occurred. That's not to say the spill didn't occur, it occurred. But the point is that the oceans do have a great regenerative capability over time. Of course, there will be damages up front this year and next year and perhaps the year after. And if this is as big an event as it might be, this could be a bigger spill than Ishtok 1, which means Ishtok 1's not a very good guide here, and it's only suggestive anyway. But it's not simply a matter of hubris or voodoo to point out that that even larger spills, at least larger than what the U.S. government thinks is in play here, have played themselves out in a way that had no long-term environmental impact. Short-term, yes, but not long-term. BP, again, is looking at a $12 billion liability bill based on the estimates. That's less than 1 year's worth of profit. They are capable of making everyone whole who's been harmed by this, except of course the dead employees on the rig. They can't do anything about that, but I'm certain they'll be paying a lot for that as well.
Well, let me ask Patricia this then. Do you think that there are some groups out there that are torquing this story for other purposes, and that frankly the environmental damages long term won't be as significant as some people fear?
Well, I would say no. I think that the environmental damage, at least in the next few years, is actually going to be quite significant. So I really think it's probably a genuine response. And it will be quite interesting, though, to see what President Obama decides to do in response to these difficulties. And I'm hoping that they're not going to completely shut down offshore drilling in the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, because of course the unfortunate thing is that that really was the jurisdiction that was going to yield most of the increase in supply for the American market in the next few years. It's all going to be from deepwater drilling. So if they simply shut it down for the next few years, and of course they have put a moratorium not only on new drilling applications, but also on the 33 rigs that were already involved in exploration and development in the Deepwater Gulf. They put a moratorium. They've actually been asked to cease drilling for the next 6 months until new regulations presumably are going to be put in place. But I'm quite, I would be quite bothered if they were actually going to put a permanent moratorium on drilling in the Gulf, because then we're going to have higher oil prices.
We're not sure what President Obama is going to do in the long run, but we know in the short run, as in last week, he did have a news conference and he did tell us what he was going to do immediately. Roll tape, please.
We're going to be ordering the following actions. First, we will suspend the planned exploration of 2 locations off the coast of Alaska. Second, we will cancel the pending lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico and the proposed lease sale off the coast of Virginia. Third, we will continue the existing moratorium and suspend the issuance of new permits to drill new deepwater wells for 6 months. And 4, we will suspend action on 33 deepwater exploratory wells currently being drilled in the Gulf of Mexico.
Peter, do you think these measures are justified in the light of what's just transpired?
Well, yeah, I think that a review needs to be done. I mean, I'm not a marine biologist to know, what the environmental damage is, or, I'm not even a safety engineer to know what sort of safety reviews. But I mean, something has gone wrong and something needs to be reviewed. And it is going to have an impact, as Patricia said, I believe, on oil prices going forward, because a substantial amount of new incremental supply for the U.S. was going to come from these regions. But, it's going to affect public perception. I mean, I think he had to do it from a political standpoint, regardless of whether you can justify it or not on an environmental basis or safety basis or any other basis. The public perception, the court of public perception, is going to demand that.
Okay, but let's take John out of the politics for a second and just look at the merits of the things. Those 4 things President Obama announced, justified in light of what's transpired?
Only in a political frame. I think the public was demanding action. They were frustrated with the response from BP. I think BP is trying to do what they can. But when the fail-safes didn't work, they were pushed up against a wall, and now they're scrambling to come up with Plan B. But I mean, the impact of suspending this drilling is enormous. 33 rigs accounts for a total of about 50,000 jobs. The Gulf supplies about 1/3 of America's energy needs. So at some point, we still are coming up against this real need that we have for energy. America imports 2/3 of its energy from abroad. At what point, does this end? Do we close it off and close off every area of America and offshore drilling because of environmental concerns and because of this one incident? Or do we fall back on the long-term record? Do we put a super regulator in charge of the energy industry in the U.S.? 13 government agencies are responsible for regulating the energy industry at the executive branch of the U.S. government. So, there is a lot of involvement. It's just, what is the right answer and what is the right measures you want the industry to respond to?
Richard, you got a couple options there. Which one would you prefer?
Well, I mean, I think the decisions that President Obama made are pretty prudent until we at least get an idea of exactly what happened. No one really knows what happened. So, until we get a better idea of what additional safeguards can be put in place or what additional response measures can be taken, I think it's a pretty reasonable.
Okay, but John's saying we're a carbon-based society.
Sure.
We need oil. If you want to pay 5 times as much for it because you've stopped all this,
right,
get ready.
Right. Well, I mean, look, our whole economic system is essentially built on the transportation of goods using cheap oil. And guess what? The cheap supplies are increasingly not there. So we're going to have to pay the piper sooner or later. So until we actually start addressing the demand issue, we're just going to keep on having these problems. I mean, okay, so it'll happen, once every few years. We're going to have a disaster or an embargo or a war. But I mean, really, until we stop importing all this oil and start drilling for oil in these remote environments, then this is just going to keep on happening.
Jerry, was the president's response appropriate?
No, I don't think so. But just to the point Richard made, if we're indeed in a world of more and more scarce crude oil, we don't need a government response to that. Market prices will go up, and that'll regulate demand. We do know that consumers do respond to price signals, particularly when they're dramatic. So I don't think any concern about scarcity and running out of crude oil necessarily requires government action. That having been said, the U.S. federal government has estimated that the likely amount of crude oil and natural gas that could be produced in the areas currently off limits to the industry on the Outer Continental Shelf total to about $1.3 trillion over the lifetime of those fields. We don't know if that number is correct or not because it's very hard to guess how much oil we have yet to find. But that number seems to be a pretty reasonable and educated guess, so let's assume it's correct. Let's also assume that the highest cost estimate of this incident is correct, the UBS estimate of $12 billion. What that tells us is that you would have to have about 100 events like this spill at the Deepwater Horizon facility over the course of the next 40 years before the costs of drilling in the OCS exceeded the benefits. So I don't believe the moratorium made any economic sense. In fact, I don't think it made much political sense, necessarily made much political sense either. We don't know how the spill will play out, but a Pew survey that was published just last week found that a majority of Americans still support drilling in the OCS, even given the spill. So it's not as if the public has yet turned on drilling. Now, the numbers have gone down because they are affected by what they're seeing on television sets. And again, this could get a lot worse with a couple of bad breaks by BP, and BP's been getting nothing but bad breaks so far.
Okay, Richard,
so we don't
come
know
on
how
in.
ultimately it'll play.
Well, I mean, yeah, hurricane season is coming. We don't exactly know what that's going to do. But just to your point about not needing government intervention and increased prices, I mean, the government absolutely has a role in providing infrastructure to give consumers options for how to move goods and access services and people in places. So, I mean, your point about, yeah, the free market economics, fine, but I mean, to say that government doesn't have a role in providing some infrastructure and is, I just don't think that's realistic.
Jerry, just come back on this as well.
I didn't say the government had no role in providing infrastructure.
Okay, come back on this as well, Jerry. I mean, the numbers you gave us, from what I've read, are correct. Do you feel comfortable putting those out there? I mean, it's a fairly cold calculation to say that this might cost $12 billion, but the potential benefits are $1.4 trillion in the ocean, and therefore it's worth doing. I mean, you might have a tough sell in New Orleans on that today, don't you think?
Oh, I don't know. It seems as if the greatest support for drilling still happens to be in Louisiana. I mean, there's more opposition to this moratorium there than anywhere else. Not from Bobby Jindal, but from the Senate. And if you look at public opinion polls, it's still relatively popular. Yeah, it's an adult conversation. It's one that people weigh costs and benefits. Most Americans are still in favor of drilling, which sort of suggests that they understand the benefits of drilling in the OCS still exceed the costs even with this incident. But you're right, it's not the sort of thing I'd recommend a politician say, but I don't have to stand for office. All I have to do is call them as I see them.
Okay, fair enough. John, try this on. This just came across the New York Times website about an hour or so ago. U.S. opens criminal inquiry into Gulf oil spill. The Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, said today that federal authorities have opened a criminal and civil investigation into all of this. And you know what? Should someone go to jail at the end of the day?
Who knows? There's definitely a political a dynamic, a people dynamic that was active here. I mean, you had several parties involved. You had Halliburton that was responsible for cementing the well. Apparently there's some issue that maybe that wasn't properly done, or they used nitrogen in the cement and that weakened it. There was Transocean, the operator of the rig. There's 130 bodies that can bunk on that rig. Are you working for Transocean, or are you really working for BP, the operator of the rig, and one of its partners? And so at various stages, even leading up to the blowout in the rig that eventually caught fire and caused it to sink, there were warning signs. Pressure was dropping 5 hours before the blowout occurred, another warning with pressure increasing 2 hours before, all signals that there were problems down below, and somehow all those signals were missed. And this is what ultimately left to this situation. And then, of course, the blowout preventer failed to cut the well up, and the pressure just came right up the pipe.
You think we'd see fewer environmental problems, Patricia, if we threw a few more corporate executives in jail?
Possibly, but I think it's quite difficult to prove criminality, and I'm sure there was really no criminal intent in all of this. We had
no criminal
an
intent,
accident.
but we've got some memos which say that when offered the option, they took the cheaper, less effective, as opposed
perhaps,
to the...
and but that I think really has more to do with really best practice, with really the kind of operating practice that they really had in place, and I'm not sure that I really know what the answer to that is.
Okay, let me try this with Peter then, because we've got 5 minutes to go. I've got a few more things to cover here. Peter, again, out of the world of cold calculations, will all of this, do you think, result in a boost for the oil sands, which, a lot of people, I think, like Richard Laszlo, may not be big fans of, but the reality is they're not drilling 1.5 kilometers in sensitive wetlands in your part of the world. What do you think?
Right. Well, there's two sides to the story. I think in the near term meaning the next 3 to 5 years, it is positive for the oil sands in a sense that I believe the price of oil is going to go up. I already believed it was going to go up, and this incident is going to probably accelerate that, particularly when you look out a couple of years. But in the long term, it's negative. I believe that this incident and potentially others to come are just going to increase the resolve of the public and the governments that lead the public into getting off oil faster. And so as you look sort of mid-decade and beyond, it's not good for the oil sands, because when the world really starts seriously to thinking about getting off oil, the first barrels to be cut are going to be the highest cost barrels, and the highest cost barrels in the world right now are the oil sands barrels.
Well, Jerry, as people search for potential alternatives, given what has happened this time, one of the things we hear frequently mentioned is something called shale gas. Would you tell us what that is?
Well, shale gas is natural gas that are in geological formations that were very hard to get to until technological innovation unlocked a tremendous amount of profitable gas for the industry. We always knew it was there, but the horizontal drilling and some other technologies were able to bring it up to market with a profit. If that sort of technology were to hit the oil industry, nobody's predicting it in the near term, but nobody was predicting this breakthrough in shale gas either, that would unleash a tremendous amount of crude oil. For instance, the shale rock geological formations in North Dakota and elsewhere in the upper Midwest are about as large as the amount of crude oil we have in Saudi Arabia. So we can't know what the future trends in price are. And I'm certainly not convinced that this incident is going to accelerate any run in oil prices. Oil prices have been going down and not up, and they seem to be accelerating in a downward sense even during the spill. That's not because the spill caused prices to go down, but prices are already at not historic highs, but they're high historically speaking, and there's as much reason to believe the prices are going to be going down in the near term as there are to believe the prices will be going up in the near term.
John, how about shale gas as an option?
Well, not as a replacement directly for what oil does. Really, oil is used as a transportation fuel throughout most of the world, and if you want to have natural gas-fired cars, sure, it's a possibility. It's attractive economically, at least at this point in time. But you have to change over every single fleet. You've got hundreds of millions of cars just in North America to do. So it's a non-starter right now.
Patricia?
Well, interestingly, that new horizontal multi-frac drilling technology is being used in some emerging oil plays in Western Canada, what are called tight oil. And we've got some really great plays there, and one of them called the Bakken, they're actually railing it all the way down to refineries in Louisiana, in fact, which is quite a fascinating development. So I think when there's a will, there's a way.
Shale gas? Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's had a huge impact on natural gas prices, and it's certainly increased reserves across North America. Still, I'm waiting for some good information on what the environmental impacts are on aquifers and groundwater and so forth. But yeah, as John said, I mean, oil is primarily used for transportation fuel, and that's really not what we use natural gas for right now. So, that's going to take a lot of time, should we go that route as a replacement fuel, to build up that infrastructure.
Peter, last 20 seconds to you here. How likely do you think it is that natural gas from shale is going to significantly reduce oil consumption across North America?
Very low. The substitutability of natural gas vehicles for petroleum-based vehicles is very low. The only way is indirectly through electric vehicles, but that's sort of a end of the decade story.
This too may be an end of the decade. No, wait a sec. We're at the end of the decade right now. This may be another decade that we keep talking about this oil spill in the Gulf. I want to thank everybody for coming on our program tonight and helping us with this story. Peter Tertzakian, 1,000 barrels a second out of Calgary. Jerry Taylor from the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. My thanks to both of you for being there on your respective locations. Richard Laszlo from Pollution Probe, Patricia Mohr from the Scotiabank Group, John Stephenson, First Asset Funds. My thanks to you three as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.